excited to have Trish with us today, and she is a registered dietitian nutritionist. Did I get that right this time?
Yes, you did.
Wonderful. And she's going to be sharing with us. We're going to be talking about fueling resiliency and really looking at how nutrition impacts the overall spectrum of being able to have quality of life, health span, lifespan, and also overcome and change and continue to grow as human beings, and how important nutrition is in intersecting with every helping professional field. And real quick, Trish, we have people from all over the country, potentially in other parts of the world as well. Why don't you share where you're located and whether you do offer virtual services as well? And for a note, everyone, her website will be on the last slide as well.
Yes, I am located in Utah. I'm actually located in Davis County. So my in-person scope when I'm taking clients is usually from Salt Lake up through Ogden area along the Wasatch Front. But I do virtual counseling and do take clients virtually and do some counseling that way. One thing that I think it's important to remember is, especially if you are going to be using any kind of reimbursement or going through any type of referral system that involves your healthcare provider or insurance, it's usually the best idea to find a dietitian within your state, simply because of the licensing that goes on. I am licensed within the state of Utah as a dietitian. You know, I'm happy to counsel and give information and do all that kind of stuff to anyone, anywhere. But if that is an issue that you say, I do want to approach maybe some reimbursement or things like that, then you might want to think about finding a dietitian in your state just for licensing issues. Food fascinates me, and I'm always amazed at how many different ways food affects our health and happiness. And the older I get, the more I understand that there really is no health without happiness attached, and that in a lot of ways does apply to food and nutrition as well. And when Em was asking me about doing this webinar, she talked about resiliency and food and fueling resiliency. I looked up resilient, and the definition that popped up was capable of withstanding shock without permanent damage, or the ability to recover quickly from and adjust easily to change. And then I looked up the word eat as well. And besides just ingesting or consuming, the last part of that definition said to enjoy eagerly. And I really, really like that part about eating. The last word that I looked up was nourish, and that is to sustain, feed, support, or promote growth. And so that is what we're aiming to do on a physical level and an emotional level as well when it comes to food. How diet influences mood, behavior, and resiliency. And I'm going to be going over these topics of how it is fuel for our bodies, and then a basic kind of overview about basic nutrient intake, kind of a little mini nutrition 101. And then a reminder about not overvaluing food or one nutrient more heroic than another, or vilifying foods. And then just a basic reminder about what is the actual bedrock of nutrition, what is tried and true when all the dust clears from trends and fads. Focus on what you want your life to look like, not just your body. And if I could get clients to understand that, we would be halfway down the road already. Fuel. Just the other day, I was actually driving in my the kid car, okay? And, which I don't drive that often. And I had not really paid that much attention to the gas gauge. And bing, the little fuel light goes on. And I don't know about the rest of you, but immediately you get that sort of surge of adrenaline, like, oh, shoot, where is the nearest gas station? How many gallons really are left when that light comes on? How well do I know my fuel tank? And do I have time to gas up? That kind of thing. And it's interesting how in a car situation, that fuel is a very immediate need. And we stop, and whatever happens, we're going to pull off and we're going to gas up. But oftentimes we don't respond as promptly to our own body's fuel needs. When we're running low, when we're running on fumes, and our gas tank is getting empty, sometimes we will ignore and put that off. And instead, it's more of a low level of stress hormones that do end up eating away at our mood and ultimately our behavior as well. So I've got this hunger satiety scale. And as with most things in life, the safety zone is in the center. If you look at it as a scale from like 0 to 10, 0 being absolutely running on fumes, there is nothing left. I mean, you're just going to have to wheel me to the kitchen because I can't even crawl. And 10 is more of the post-Thanksgiving, roll me down to the bathroom, I think I'm going to retch kind of a sensation. The safe zone is going to be more in the center. And so helping to introduce individuals to this concept of saying, okay, do I actually think about this? Before I eat, number one, am I hungry? Number two, how hungry am I? And after I eat, did I overshoot it? Am I at an 8 or a 9? Or am I more at a comfortable 6 or 7? In order to stay in that safety zone, that center area, without avoiding those extremes that can be dangerous, we do have to actually check in when we eat and be present and think, how am I feeling? Is this feeling good? Am I even noticing that I'm consuming food? Or have I zoned out with my webinar on the lunch hour, or the binging on Netflix that's going on, or the load of emails that I need to deal with, or whatever it is that we do while we actually stopping mid-meal to say, where am I? Am I at about a 4 or 5? Am I pushing a 6? Do I need to stop? Do I need to keep going? Very few people actually stop and check in, paying attention to that gas gauge.
When you work with clients, do you find that, just, turning off all the distractions while they eat changes the game completely?
It does. And for a lot of people, that is hard. People get very attached and tied, well, as we all are, to some kind of screen stimulation. And for a long time, it's kind of an adjustment for them to understand that, oh, I can be quiet, I can sit, I can actually have conversation with a human, not just with a screen, not with my thumbs, and I can pay attention to the food and notice texture and flavor instead of inhaling on the go or zoning out. And for a lot of people, that's a huge adjustment right there. And getting them to make that commitment to turn off and unplug is big. When I'm counseling with families, I always say, you know what? No devices at the table.
How technology has permeated our lives and, the indirect effect of so many different things. But I think technology in particular requires a level of responsibility in that when we are so addicted to it, we become mindless about anything else that's going on because that's always there. And this is coming from a place like I tend to watch Netflix. We watch MasterChef when we're a family sometimes, or different things like that. And every time we have the TV on or we allow devices at the table, I always eat more than I wanted to. And I feel I get to that 8 or 9. And I'm like, why did I do that? Why didn't I stop? And it's like, how could you notice that subtle message from your body when you're so distracted?
Exactly. And a little bit later on, we're going to talk about this sort of negative habit that we have as Americans to either A, eat quickly or eat distractedly. I think we've all had that sensation of either sitting down to watch a video or in a movie theater, and you've got the bag of Cheetos or you've got the giant popcorn, and suddenly the movie's over and all you have left is a greasy cardboard thing on your lap that's empty. And you're thinking, how did this happen? Because we zone out. All right, basic nutrient intake. So this is your little mini Nutrition 101. 3 main nutrients that we talk about when it comes to food. We've got carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. They all serve different but complementary roles. One is no better than another, in spite of what you may hear in current media culture. With carbohydrates, for example, that is your basic fuel. That's the gas that goes in your gas tank. That's what your organs are going to run on. That's what basic metabolism is fueled by. That's what your brain runs on, is glucose. Your body will work very hard if it does not have carbohydrates being ingested to use any other sources and nutrients or even body tissues to break them down and turn them into carbohydrates to use for that metabolism. So it really is important to recognize that carbohydrates do have value. They are our body's preferred fuel. Obviously, a mix of carbohydrates is ideal, to say some from whole grains, some from simple sugars that are going to be coming from whole food sources. So things like fruits, vegetables, things like that, milks, all those kinds of things that contain other simple sugars. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to carbs. They contain also, these carbohydrate foods give us lots of B vitamins, fiber, vitamin E, minerals, magnesium, lots of things that we really do need in our diet. So carbs. Then we've got protein, who has been in the limelight socially for a while, but protein helps with satiety. It helps keeps us a little fuller longer, tides us over a little bit more. It kind of blunts the insulin response a bit. It helps with building tissue, repairing tissue, the immune response. And so it is very vital and key, but it's not the only star of the show. Fats. This is also one that's been kind of up and down in society's view of what is a good or a bad nutrient, shall we say. But fat, it's going to help balance the insulin response as well. It also keeps us more satisfied at a meal, and it satisfies us longer. Sometimes it helps sort of turn off that, yes, I'm satisfied, I can be done eating now. It's also important for the metabolism of certain organ systems. It helps with the production of hormones. It helps with the absorption, storage, and metabolism of fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. So we need it. It's an insulator. There's all sorts of things that we need fat for, and fat in the diet is key. Fight the temptation to overvalue or vilify. One food is not necessarily better than another. When I speak in schools, I will often lecture and do some guest presentations at schools, and I will ask the kids, I'll say, okay, let's say you're stranded on the side of Mount Everest, and by some miracle, your friendly dietitian is flying by in a helicopter. You're stuck on the side, you can't get down, you're running low on supplies. She either offers you a Snickers or a salad. What are you going to choose? And it's interesting to hear the responses. And when it comes down to it, you need the Snickers on the side of Mount Everest. That salad is really not going to do a whole lot for you. The Snickers could save your life, whereas the salad could not. There's different things and different applications. And when it all comes down to it, one thing is not necessarily morally superior than another. I know that I'm swimming upstream with this message. Food is not that moral choice. So fight the temptation to vilify the carbs and tout the protein, or vice versa. For those of us that are old enough to remember when fats were really bad and eggs were bad and cholesterol, oh, it was really scary and you shouldn't eat eggs, and now it's been carbs and I'm just waiting for protein to take a turn. It's just one of those roller coaster rides that you need to step back and fight the urge to make one the villain or one the hero.
I think that's such an important point, because in the world of therapy, and I know we have quite a few therapists on here because we are offering CEUs, I think a big lesson that we try to come back to a lot with our clients is to let go of the shame and let go of the morality in all sorts of simple daily things, right? That not only are we human, but we're here to live fully, right? And so it's a level of common sense rather than living headline to headline, or from fad to fad, or from shame-based message to shame-based message.
Absolutely. Okay. And that leads us right into that bedrock slide. When I was looking at the sort of the history of the fad diet, that roller coaster, it's not new. I mean, heaven only knows it is definitely thriving and well today in the world of social media. And whether we're talking the cabbage soup diet from decades ago, to the juice cleanses from now, back to vinegar diets that were in the 1800s, or even back to William the Conqueror, who had a liquor diet. Okay, there's a few problems going on right there. But from the 1800s, I mean, it's been around for probably as long as man has been on the earth, trying to come up with a magic fix. And unfortunately, common sense seems to be less and less prevalent when it comes to nutrition. But I think that should be one of the major food groups, is common sense, to say, really, seriously, if it sounds too good to be true, no. Fear and guilt sell. And that is why the diet industry is a $66 billion industry. They market fear, guilt, and failure. And that's what we want to try and avoid. Some of the questions that I will pose when individuals are looking for help when it comes to food and nutrition, to say, is there a connection between what I'm eating, how I'm feeling, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, those kinds of things. One of the first things that I will ask is there a dependence on one certain food or beverage that you will go to for any reason? The most common is usually for energy intake. Caffeine is kind of the elephant in the room here with this question, but there's other options that are out there that people will go to. And I will say, fill in the blank. If I don't have my fill in the blank, I just can't function. And then we try to address that, because anytime that you are excessively dependent on any one food item or beverage item to function or get your main boost of energy or make it through the day, that's going to be a problem. You never want to surrender your personal power and that resilient independence to any other food or beverage. Do I struggle at certain times of the day with hanger? Okay. Hangry, the one of the newer words in the American vocabulary. Oh yeah. I am nasty if I mid-afternoon, or if I skip lunch or things like that. When you notice that your energy level is dropping, that leads to a change in mood, focus, mental state, irritability. Again, it comes back to being able to be in touch with your body's natural cues and actually respond to them appropriately, and avoid those habits of the extremely empty or the over full. Oftentimes, people will pendulum from one extreme to the other, and it's hard to get away from those two ends and get back into that safe center zone. But paying attention to your body's signals. And if you don't know how to answer that question, ask anyone around you. Do you have a roommate? Do you have a family member? Do you have a coworker? You could ask them, and they'd probably be able to say, yeah, you know what, 4 o'clock every day. Do I feel stressed or overwhelmed at meal times? This one kind of makes me sad. I see a lot more of this in some of my residential treatment center kiddos, and with especially youth in general, as they are dealing with more and more anxiety. That ends up encroaching on food and eating experience. And so oftentimes anxiety becomes tied or linked to an eating experience or a specific food or a mealtime. And then even if they don't have an eating disorder per se, it starts to become a version of disordered eating. So anytime that there's a lot of excessive amounts of food to choose from, that may be overwhelming and stressful and anxiety inducing. Lack of control over what the menu is. Maybe it's just that analysis paralysis is, I don't know what to choose. What should I eat? What is it that do I need? Then another question, when it comes to that stress at meal times, it doesn't mean that it's not just for those that suffer from anxiety, but it may be, where is meal planning on your priority scale? And either it's not at all, or it's a very hated task. And so oftentimes we work to sort of ease that and make that less stressful of an event. Eating events, especially at home or when you're preparing the meal, it's one more decision in a world that is full of so many decisions all throughout the day. 5 o'clock, don't ask me what's for dinner. I don't know. I don't care. If someone would decide, I'd be happy to make it, but I don't want to think about it. So being able to teach them how to best plan for their scenario. And that may be clumping their planning a week at a time, a month at a time, or 2 weeks at a time. And I'll sit down and grind through it for an hour, and then I don't have to think about it, and it frees up a lot of that stress.
I love that. I'm a single mom with 2 kiddos and full-time work, and that's the worst when you're all hungry and now you're trying to decide. Especially, I'm a type 1 diabetic, and so once I get hungry, I definitely get hangry. So I'm always trying to prevent that. And for me, I'm sure you have tons of strategies that you use with your clients. But I remember after I went through a phase where I got rid of all my clothes and went out and bought just a few outfits that I loved. And in my closet, I only had a few options, kind of called like the French method of your wardrobe.
Mhm.
And I feel like that works so well in the fridge too for our family anyways, just to have like the next 5 dinners in the fridge and already planned out so that when you open it, you're just choosing between one of them and there's no other options. Like I hate having a freezer full of options because we get into that analysis paralysis pretty quickly.
And it can be really overwhelming. And there's something to be said for saying having a well-stocked pantry or a freezer or a fridge. But I agree, having something down to say, you know what, I have all the ingredients for any of these 5 meals during the week. And if it turned out to be a rainy day and I'm not having salad, I'll swap my salad and soup day and I'm good to go. But having those things to choose from to narrow the choices. All right. The next question. Do I feel hunger before and fullness after eating? That may seem like kind of a rhetorical, I mean, really, you have to ask that kind of a question. Hunger and fullness are signs of health. And I think you'd be surprised at how many people don't necessarily feel or recognize hunger and fullness. Being able to understand what it feels like individually for you may not be what it feels like for another person. Like you mentioned, Em, you start to get that irritable and that blood sugar starts to drop and things like that. Whereas other people, it may just be that rumbling in their stomach. Other people, they might start to feel lightheaded or get a little weak, or understanding what hunger feels like to you and then what fullness also feels like to you. Those are two very important sensations to be able to feel and recognize. And if you're still feeling those two things, you can pat yourself on the back and say, yay, I at least have those signs of health. Because when we stop listening to our body's cues long enough and we start overriding them and ignoring them, your body stops sending those signals. You don't feel hunger or fullness if you are a chronic dieter or you are stuck on a different eating regimen that pays no attention to your natural body's cues. The good news is that you can always get back to that. Your body can start to talk to you again. It's not like if it stops giving those signals, you're done. Once you start getting back into some mindful eating practices and paying attention, then your body will start talking to you again. But it is a bit of a challenge to relearn that. And like I mentioned earlier, remembering to check in partway through the meal. And it's an interesting experiment just to try with yourself to say, you know what? This weekend, I'm just going to check. And I'm going to say, okay, on that scale of 0 to 10, where am I? Before, midway, and after. The next question. Does my eating pattern make me feel happy as well as healthy? And I mentioned early on that there really is no healthy without happy. I think that it's important for people to understand that food fills a real role nutritionally with nutrients, but it's not just a medication that you can go fill a prescription for. Food carries a lot of other roles, social, emotional, cultural, a lot of things that determine our background, shared memory, some of our identity, all sorts of things that we identify with food. And when we start to eliminate that and say, no, food is only fuel and it just meets these specific requirements of carbs and proteins and fats, and I've hit my calorie level and that's the end of the story, that's not healthy. Those kinds of rigid rules don't support or encourage resiliency. My take on eating with a resilient attitude means I'm the one in control. I'm not depending on external rules and guidelines to dictate what it is that I'm eating. And understanding that balance and flexibility definitely play a role. Life will happen, and you're going to have to hit the drive-thru of the fast food. It's going to happen. Or there's going to be the birthday cake or the whatever that you say, maybe that's not my favorite thing or what I really wanted to have for dinner today, but you know what? That's how it turned out today because all heck broke loose. So being able to be flexible, to work around and not be so tied to rigid rules. And then always, always avoiding deprivation. Anytime that a client decides to go on a diet and deprive themselves, that leads to restriction, deprivation. Then eventually they give in, they indulge, they feel guilt, and they just perpetuate that cycle over and over, which erodes not only physical cues, but it also erodes their relationship with food. So making sure that you've got enough happy foods in there to keep you happy as well as healthy.
I think this is so important for helping professionals to recognize, especially therapists, because oftentimes we see clients utilize food as a place where they can feel in control. And because they've been traumatized, I've seen this with a lot of rape victims or those who've experienced significant domestic violence. Whenever we feel out of control in our lives, a primary coping mechanism is to try to feel in control somewhere else. And especially for women who are so socially motivated to look a certain way in our society, that control can feed into how we feed ourselves. And then it just kind of masks the problem. And so as helping professionals, one warning sign we can look for is a client that is dieting frequently or gets kind of a high or a sense of pride over how well they're able to control their food. Because it really just shows that there's this other bigger issue going on where they don't feel safe and in control in other parts of their life. And so it's a great area to just have some awareness and ask some basic questions, and then potentially tag team and collaborate with a dietary professional so that the client can make baby steps away from controlling food toward finding that sense of self-control in the world through mindfulness and meditation and finding peace with their experiences, which can be a long process.
No, and that is so true. And I have seen that so many times where something traumatic happens where you feel like, something is outside of your control. And I've watched a family member go through that and went on a very, very rigid, restrictive diet. At one point was actually able to say, this is why. I can control nothing else, so I'm going to focus all my control right here on eating. And so, the way a person eats, like I said, food touches everything, and it can be very symptomatic of a lot of underlying behaviors. And oftentimes as a dietitian, when I'm working with people, and whether it's a chronic dieter or an eating disorder, oftentimes there's a point where I say, that is outside my purview. And this is something that needs to be addressed by a therapist or, another professional, because this is no longer a nutritional issue. The other question, do I look forward to and enjoy eating? Which kind of goes back with that healthy, happy bit. Our bodies are actually designed to get more nutrition from foods we enjoy. When you go into a restaurant or a place that you're going to eat and it smells good and it's one of your favorite things, it looks good, and your stomach starts to growl and you're just starting to get hungry. You may not have even known you were hungry until you walked in. That's called the cephalic phase of digestion. That's your brain turning on and saying, here comes the good stuff. Let's get the bile salts going. Let's get the gastric acid and the enzymes and everything on board so we can absorb as much iron as possible and vitamins and minerals, because this is the good stuff. And that is lacking in food that does not appeal to us. So actually being able to enjoy your meals is actually a smart health strategy. Planning in a good variety and including foods that you actually like. I mentioned earlier about how as Americans, we're kind of fast eaters. We're not just kind of fast eaters, we're really fast eaters. The amount of time that the average American spends eating and drinking during the day, this includes all meals and snacks, is 68 minutes. And that may sound like a lot of time to you, but it's really not, especially when you understand that the fullness signal takes about 20 minutes to go from your stomach up to your brain and back to say, whoa, we're full. We need to start putting the brakes on. meal times need to last more than 15 or 20 minutes. Slowing down and actually being present, being able to give time to savor textures and flavors, like we mentioned, being unplugged, eating either with other people or experiencing some mindfulness if you're eating alone, and taking time to actually nourish and recharge instead of just hurrying through it and getting it on to the next activity. I think that's one of the problems with our culture is we don't value mealtime and eating as much as other cultures do, especially things like, the French or some of these European demographics that spend a lot of time over meals. They linger and they savor and they enjoy, and they amazingly do not have the same kind of health issues that we have regarding nutrition related diseases. So learning to not just hustle and what I call hoover or vacuum in or inhale your food is really key. This other question, would I feel comfortable if loved ones followed my eating patterns? Eye-opening question that I think is important. One of the ones that really crystallizes how people feel about their eating behaviors is to say, would you feel comfortable if a 7 or 8-year-old child, niece, neighbor, cousin, whatever, were to follow your eating pattern? And a lot of times their eyes get kind of wide and you understand that some things are falling into place. Is the way you're eating negatively affecting your relationships with other people? Is it making it harder and straining relationships? That's another red flag. The next one is to learn to empower healthier mood and emotional resiliency by planning for meals and snacks, getting a good balance of nutrients in your diet, feeding your gut and your brain, strengthening your relationship with food, and then either eating with other people or eating mindfully, hopefully both. The best things are rarely accidental. Good nutrition does not spontaneously happen very often, especially in our world today. Skipping meals, not a great idea. Skipping rope, yes. Healthy, skipping meals, not so much. Making a plan and having that in place and helping people understand that it's not just make a plan and that's it, but have a few layers of backup plans. Do you have some snacks in a car so when you're stuck in traffic after soccer practice, you're not, just a car full of hangry people? Where you need to keep some snacks on hand, some backup plans to involve that flexibility. Anytime that we don't make it a priority and make that plan, our busy schedules will hijack and take over the time and attention that should be spent with food preparation and enjoyment. Balance. In that Nutrition 101, we talked about carbs, proteins, and fats. The reality is that those nutrients are very mixed throughout the food supply. For example, grains contain carbs and fats and proteins. Almost every food category has some mix of all three of those nutrients. It's not as hard to get a good balanced diet as you may think. Variety really is key. And I tell clients that if you're aiming for at least 3 food groups in a meal, that's a good thing to shoot for. 4 would be great, at least shoot for 3. A snack, try and hit a couple different food groups. 2 would be ideal. And in that way, you're going to be getting enough variety to hit those nutrients. The next one, feeding your gut and brain. They actually have found a correlation, not causation. I want to be clear on that. The word is correlation, not causation, between a diet high in refined sugars and impaired brain function and worsening of certain mood disorders such as depression and other things. But like I mentioned earlier, the brain does run on glucose. So what is exactly happening? Well, serotonin, that happy neurotransmitter that helps stabilize our mood, might be that missing link. 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut. When we've got too many of those refined sugars, you're going to have a less healthy gut and less of that serotonin produced. Serotonin, microbiome, probiotics, oh my. A lot of this terminology gets a little overwhelming when you start talking probiotics, prebiotics, microbiome, normal flora. Basically, a healthy gut doesn't just make us healthy overall, and that helps with one's mood. Because if your gut ain't happy, ain't no one happy. But it also helps to maintain a healthy amount of good bacteria in your gut. Okay, the microbiome means what bacteria are living in your gut. Probiotics are those healthy bacteria. Those are the ones that you're going to find usually in those cultured foods, yogurts, kefir, and in a lot of those fresh pickles, sauerkrauts. Prebiotics are the food sources that feed the bacteria and keep them healthy so that you can produce that serotonin in your gut. The nice thing is that those prebiotics come in a lot of normal foods that if you have a variety, you're getting a good amount in. The best action plan for a healthy gut is to eat less processed foods, not necessarily none. I'm not going to be black and white like that, but less, and eat more fruits and veggies and whole grains. And if you can, to incorporate some fermented or cultured foods to get some of the food sources of probiotics. Resiliency means being comfortable with questions. The most common question that I hear from clients is, or maybe it's a comment, I don't know how to eat. I think what they're really trying to say is, I cannot process all the information coming at me to figure out how to eat correctly. And I still say, oh, rubbish. We need to learn to really filter out the trends. If it's hitting a headline or hitting your social media feed, be wary. A big red flag should come up. And anytime that a message is going to inspire guilt or fear or any other really strong motivating emotion, watch and see and wait. Especially if it's a negative emotion, that should be a red flag. A resilient relationship with food. When it comes down to it, your longest relationship in your life is with food. So making sure there's balance, allowing for exceptions. Routines are great, but allow some wiggle room. Find enjoyment, and making sure to allow for good hydration, wholesome variety of foods. Allow fun foods to be a part of your normal routine, and then eliminate the good and bad food labels. A food does not make you a good or bad person, but the way you eat does not make you better than someone else. So anytime that you say, when do I refer? Anytime that there's a medical diagnosis that requires that, most medical diagnoses do have a link to nutrition. Anytime there's an eating disorder or suspected disordered eating, anytime that someone is feeling continuously overwhelmed, not just annoyed with the whole eating and meal planning situation, body image issues, often I deal with a lot of that because that plays very much into eating and food choices, food relationship struggles, and then if there's an eating pattern that is disrupting their lifestyle or their relationships, especially if there's a tendency or a history of chronic dieting or repeated dieting.
Great. So this question is from Kelsey, and this is perfect. I feel like motivation to change is the hardest part of working on eating diet changes. I feel like these questions and information are very helpful, but how do you help your clients apply the information and actually make the changes?
If I could do one thing, it would be to give someone motivation, but we really can't. And oftentimes it requires them to be in the right frame of mind and ready for that kind of a change. Oftentimes what I will do is say, okay, when we sit down and we talk about this and say, what's going on? What are some ways that we can change that are going to give you a little bit more bang for your buck? Something that may be noticeable. And oftentimes we'll start out with a few different changes that are gentle and fairly simple, but can make some noticeable changes to help motivate them to continue on. But more than anything, I try to reassure them that the slower the change, the longer it lasts. Just like with weight loss. In this country, we diet and lose weight all the time, but we don't maintain. We can't maintain. And people get afraid of the plateaus, but that's what we need to do more of. We need to do more maintenance. And so being able to help them understand that the smaller, the slower, the more lifelong it is. And if a change is a little easier, it's probably going to last longer than if it's drastic and difficult.
And I would love to chime in that within every helping profession, one of the things that took me so long as a therapist to really honor is that when we approach and hold space for our clients with unconditional positive regard, which often with food is something they're lacking for themselves. They have a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of hesitation, and that gets in the way of maintaining any type of change, is when we can hold that space of unconditional positive regard. Our clients have this inherent wisdom of what they need to do, just like Tricia talking about. They know how they want to change and what they need to do to change. And maybe they need a little information for more awareness, more motivation, but they know deep down what they need to do. And it's holding that space that creates the conditions for change. I think the most important thing we can do for any of us is to maintain that relationship, that rapport, so that they can come into that wisdom and take that first step themselves.
I agree.
So on these other red flags, I wanted to bring these up because I had a couple clinicians ask me about this ahead of this webinar of, dietary red flags. Because obviously, if you're a therapist or a coach or a clergy member or a counselor in a school, you can't know all of nutrition. That's what you're here for. But as we're working with a client, some of the red flags that we could look for, a lot of our clients will present with fatigue, a sense of depression, irritability, sleep problems, anxiety, sexual problems within couples counseling or even in individual sessions. And so I was wondering if you could speak to kind of some of the potential, just to give us a little bit of awareness around how food can impact this. Like, for example, drinking too much caffeine in the evening could obviously affect sleep and then cause fatigue the next day.
And truly, like I said, food touches everything. It's going to be able to influence all of those things. So depending on, for sleep example, not just caffeine intake during the day, but how sleep deprivation may change their food choices the following day is going to be very different, because those that stay up late and are getting less sleep generally make different food choices throughout the day. They're going to be choosing more processed foods, more simple sugars, having less fruits and vegetables throughout the day, less fiber. They generally eat more in the evening, and it kind of helps to perpetuate that sleep deprivation, less sleep cycle. One may influence the other, and then it again comes back to influence how their eating habits are perpetuated. But any of those things, whether it's energy levels or whether it's, like you said, with sexual satisfaction in couples or relationships at home or any of those kinds of things, food touches everything.
Oftentimes we're trained as clinicians or within our particular lane of focus, whatever that is, to only look in that lane. And so I know in my early years as a therapist, I never would have thought, like, maybe the anxiety that my clients is experiencing in the afternoon has something to do with the giant mocha that they get at 11 a.m. or failure to eat lunch, maybe, or deprivation, and so you get the jitters. Like, there's so many aspects of this that might provide clues if we just ask a few simple questions.
Yes.
Moving on to like eating disorder awareness, I just wanted to include this as part of the presentation for those that are joining us or watching the recording who don't necessarily have a background in dietetics, nutrition, or the mental health side, where we do usually get an overview of eating disorders, and just kind of going over some of the warning signs of disordered eating.
Okay, so oftentimes with disordered eating, we think about anorexia, we think about bulimia, but any kind of extreme behavior with eating, whether it's binging, purging through exercise, restricting food intake or time of day or places that they're eating, repeated dieting are red flags as well. Body dysmorphia comes into play oftentimes, and there's oftentimes a lot of body image issues that surface surrounding eating disorders. Also things like orthorexia. It's not an eating disorder diagnosis at this time. I would say watch, because it probably will become so, but it is a form of disordered eating that is very large and growing, especially fueled by social media, Instagram in particular. Orthorexia is essentially an obsession with healthy eating. And so anytime that is becoming a focus and an obsession, that I have to eat this because I have to be good and I have to be very rigid, should be another red flag.
All right. So what about working with a dietitian or other nutrition professional? You had mentioned before the kinds of dietary professionals, but if you could reiterate the differences between the two and how to look for one, select one, assess for a good fit, how that looks typically in your industry for referrals and collaboration.
Okay, so when you're looking for a nutrition professional, look for RD as the credential to look at. RD or RDN, registered dietitian or registered dietitian nutritionist. That's the same thing. It's just that a lot of people relate more with the term nutritionist, and so they have incorporated that into the dietitian credential. However, the RD is the important part. That means they have completed the schooling, done the practical internships and the hands-on information, and also have gone through registration exam. And they have to get the 75 hours of continuing education every 5 years to maintain that credential. So you want to find an RD. Every registered dietitian is a nutritionist, but not every nutritionist is a registered dietitian. The nutritionist, that term alone is not credentialed. So you do want to make sure there's RD. As far as finding one, oftentimes doing a geographic search, and I know that in one of the following slides, I think towards the end, has that listed to find a dietitian near you, but also to look at what is going to be a good fit. And I do this when people approach me. I think the best option is to have, a 5-10 minute phone conversation. What is your view? What are your goals? What is it that you're looking for? And does that match with my approach? For example, I'm a non-diet dietitian. I do not promote diet behaviors and restriction. And so if I have an individual that wants, say, a 60-year-old woman that wants to fit into her wedding dress from her 20s, and she's going to keto her way there, I am not the dietitian to help her navigate that. But if you have someone who is ready to heal their relationship with food and get off the diet merry-go-round, I'm your gal. So it just takes a little, I think, communication to get a feel for their approach. And then to help them understand, depending on what services that the dietitian is going to offer. There's usually a lot of initial background information to kind of get an idea, initial consult kind of information, and then some follow-up appointments where they can address goals and follow up on some of those changes.
As far as collaboration, I know this is kind of out of the box for some of us. Honestly, it was for me, but I continue to push it because it works so well. If you work in eating disorders, you probably collaborate very heavily. But if you don't normally work in eating disorders and you just want to support your client, it might be very new as far as like how best it is to communicate with a dietitian, to work with, so if the therapist is seeing the client weekly and the dietitian's working with them weekly as well, do you tend to see that happening, that collaboration, or do you tend to see just a referral and then they're left in your lap, or what's your experience been?
More often than not, it's a referral left in my lap. I will say that. I don't think that's the ideal scenario, but I think that oftentimes that happens. For example, doctors or physicians that will refer will say, "Oh yeah, I'm referring this person to you, so there you go, and take it and run with it." I often end up having to put the onus of that sort of communication and collaboration on the client themselves, because oftentimes it is a little difficult to get back in touch and have that communication with the referring entity. It is not a perfect system.
Even just a quick email to the other provider that's working with your client to say, hey, here's what my client reported about, nutrition this week, or how they're feeling about their food, or how they felt about meeting with you, and here's some of my current concerns. That information, when we don't share it, it really is a disservice for the client.
And it makes a huge difference.
Huge, because clients are people pleasers too, and they're going to have different relationships with each professional. And so the more we can lay the groundwork that this is a team approach, helps the client to show up everywhere and to make best use of everybody's expertise to get the best possible outcome.
Yes, and I think that it provides a safer, more solid professional kind of feel for treatment overall, because you know that all bases are covered and the right hand knows what the left hand is doing.
Yes, I think in today's society, there's often 7 hands all going at once and none of them to each other, right?
True.
So collaboration, and this goes for self-care too. A big emphasis of the resiliency rooted community is ourselves first, our clients second. No matter what industry you're in, you need to be doing self-care. If you go home at night and are binging, that impacts your ability to help clients. And so it's not about being superhuman or perfect in any way. It's about having the humility to be doing your own work wherever that is in your life. And that right there makes you a much stronger helping professional. It gives you empathy for how hard it is to change some of these behaviors. and how many layers of, childhood emotional wounds or shame and guilt or different barriers that are in place in our lives. Maybe your spouse eats terribly but has a high metabolism, and so you're dealing with this losing battle in the fridge. That empathy goes a long way. Too many times I see helping professionals, including ones I've hired for myself, say, oh, it's simple, just do this. And I think this leads back to the prior question so well. We all have the information. We all, A, inherently know what's best for us if we listen in, and B, we have Google. So if we want to find the information, it's there. The reason we turn to helping professionals is that there's something else standing in the way. We need some support, some accountability, much more than just information. And we need that rapport of being with a human first and an expert second. So be sure to be doing your own work. And if you're motivated to make some slight changes in your diet based on this, things that you've known you've wanted to go after, kudos. I hope everyone walks away from this presentation with just one little thing that they might want to start changing in their lives. I really believe in that slow change, the little baby step that you just implement for a good long time and then tackle the next rather than something drastic. So if you are interested in chatting further with Trish, especially if you're here in Utah, you might have a great referral relationship, somebody that you have now met and can connect with and at least get a consultation when you're working with a client, or potentially refer your client over to Tag Team. Trish's website is up on the screen, nutritiousintent.com. And then also the helpful links that she shared as far as how to find a dietitian locally or in where you're located at. So eatrightutah.org and Health Pro Professionals, but shortened profs.com. And then I wanted to let you guys know to stay connected to future trainings. You can find my Facebook page. It's facebook.com/mcapedo. And then you can learn more about the Resiliency Rooted model and the overall certification course if you're interested at resiliencyrooted.com. I wanted to thank Trish for being here and for all of you for tuning in, as well as those that watch this recording after the fact. This is such an important area for us to have even just a little bit of awareness in as we work with our clients, regardless of what field you're in, because nutrition really does impact motivation, energy, sleep, relationships, so much of resiliency. And so reiterating some of the key takeaways that you can help your clients with and help yourself with: unplug when you're eating. Be totally present. Even if you only have that 20 minutes for the mealtime, it will be so much more meaningful and I really do believe more nutritious. Like our bodies just do something different if we are completely focused on our food and grateful for the food in front of us. And we choose things that are both healthy and that we love to eat, because as Trish pointed out, our bodies respond differently when we eat something so yummy. And I would challenge, as a type 1 diabetic, I really can't eat very many carbs at all. And I have to tell you, bread was my favorite thing in the world. I could make an artisan loaf the size of a Jeep, and it was amazing. But going through the process of working with nutrition professionals and doctors and myself to find a different way of eating was the best self-growth I've ever had to go through, because it is such a challenge. And yet there are so many empowering aspects to nutrition when we learn as much as we can about what interests us about nutrition, about food. And that could be like how to make your favorite meal at home, knowing all the ingredients. Or it could be really nerding out about the differences between simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates, and you want to become really just understanding of what you're putting into your body. When we really involve ourselves, something changes. It takes a whole different shape in our lives. So mindfully being present with our food, planning ahead, having a backup plan so that if things go awry, you're not dealing with hangry and you have healthy options around. And then, of course, having the self-compassion and the flexibility to realize that exceptions are going to happen. I really do believe it's all about mindset. Is when we choose to see that greasy pizza as, oh, well, it's a treat, I'm going to enjoy it, I'm not going to have shame about it. It really does change how we digest that food, what nutrients we take in, and how we feel about ourselves and our next choices at the next meal, right? Is it going to be a downward spiral of shame, or are we just going to pick up where we left off?
Exactly. Pizza is pizza, and it happens. So enjoy it and move on.
Beautiful. Any last final words, Trish, before we close down?
Just enjoy food. Fall in love with food again. Honestly, I think that it's, like I said, it's the longest relationship you have in your life. So take care of it.
I think we can all enjoy that recommendation. All right, thanks you guys again. If you take the quiz and pass it off, I will get you your CEU certificate shortly as well. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you so much, Trish. This was wonderful.
Thank you.